But we're talking football now. It's always a pleasure to welcome in new friends. Eric Luallen is the voice of FSU baseball, but he's Seminoles alum on the football side. And we have a mutual friend in Corey Pedersen, the Sizzler, which we'll get into in a minute, and that's why this interview is happening. He's up in Tallahassee, the state capital. Lulu, you will forever now be called Lulu on this show. How you doing, brother?
Well, I'm doing great, and I think that a lot of people would know exactly who you're talking about if you said Lulu, and maybe not if you said Eric. So that works out just fine.
Got Lulu. Okay, and let's just tell our audience what a small world it is, and that's why you got to be a good guy. The reason you're on this show is to obviously talk about the snub of FSU football, but our mutual friend Corey Pedersen, former Regina Pat hockey player, played pro and stayed here in Florida, and he's the guy that linked us up to do this. He hosts the Hockey Club podcast. If he's a friend of yours, you're a friend of mine. But how do you know the Sizzler, Corey Pedersen?
Well, I don't know the Sizzler at all. I know Bam Bam because in Tallahassee he was Bam Bam, Corey Bam Bam Pedersen. But yeah, Corey spent a year playing for the Tallahassee Tiger Sharks, our ECHL team that moved on and went to other places back, mid-'90s, I believe it was. And Corey came in, he got traded here from Wheeling, ended up in Tallahassee, and when he was done playing, he just stayed here. He became a part of the radio broadcast crew for the Tiger Sharks. I spent a couple of seasons doing some stuff with that broadcast, and we've been friends ever since his time as a player in Tallahassee, and we were in each other's weddings and all that kind of stuff. So it's one of my very dearest friends, yes.
I love it. I love it. Well, the reason, just so you know, the reason we call him the Sizzler is when he played, and I watched him. That's how old I am. I think the film was black and white, but he used to spin his stick in his hands, and he called it the Sizzler. I was just a little kid, man, but I remember that. So I still call him to this day the Sizzler. But anyways, he says, you got to get my guy Lulu on to talk about this FSU thing, the snub from the college football playoff. I mean, the waves have been felt quite literally here in South Florida, how upset you guys are, but it's all over North America how upset the Seminoles are. Give me your spiel, Lulu, and then I'll ask some of my own questions on it.
Well, I think most people kind of feel like if you go through a Power 5 conference, whatever conference that is, that you go through that and you're undefeated, that you've earned a spot in whatever the field is at that time. And it's the first time since they've gone to 4 teams that a Power 5 undefeated team has been left out in the cold. And I think everybody feels like it was a moving target for Florida State, that the parameters that they had to meet kept changing. And I think that's driving a lot of it.
Well, yeah. So the 4 teams, Washington, Texas, Alabama, and Michigan, that made it. Let me ask you this. I was shocked that, because we're on national television in Canada. I'm sure Corey told you all that. Bam Bam. We're also on the air in 31 states. He watches this almost every day. So more of our audience cares about this than I thought, being a Canadian show. So Florida State got snubbed despite going 13-0, winning the ACC conference. But let me ask you this. Devil's advocate, Lulu. Who would you take out if the Noles got in?
Well, I understand, and I don't envy the job that the committee has to do. As far as who you take out there, obviously, if I'm going to stand up and say you can't leave an undefeated team out, then it's not going to be either Michigan or Washington. I think Texas gets in based on the season they had, and if you're going to put Alabama in, you can't leave Texas out, who gave Alabama their only loss. So, again, by all of that, I think based on those things, if you're going to have Alabama in there, Texas needs to be in there. So if one team's going to be out, I think that leaves Alabama to be that team. I understand that that's not going to be a popular thing, and we haven't had a playoff without an SEC team either, but that would probably be what I would have done.
So Corey tells me you played for the Seminoles, like you broadcast baseball, but you played for the football team. Tell me your history with. So this is dear to your heart, but just tell me your history with the football club, please.
Well, I got here in 1986. I was an offensive lineman on the teams from 1986 to 89, and we had some good football teams there. I went through 2 one-loss seasons, 1987 and 88. We went 11-1 in both of those years. We went 10-2 in 1989. And we didn't have a playoff back then, but we were teams that we felt like at the end of those last 3 years that I played that we were the best team in the country. But your only opportunity to show that was to go play in a bowl game somewhere. And we won all 3 of the bowl games that we had at that time, and ended up second, third, and third, I believe, in the polls those years of 87, 88, and 89. I've got a long history here. I actually did some pregame shows before FSU games from 1997, I think, to 2012. So I've been pretty close to the program for a long time.
So they've made their noise. Nothing's going to come out of it, obviously. And now you just got to focus on the Orange Bowl, right, against Georgia. Is that enough? Because I've had a lot of NCAA alum that went on to play pro that have come on this show, whether it be viewers or guests. I'm interviewing them like I am with you right now, and they said, hey, used to be the Orange Bowl was enough. Why? Because we're not playing for the Crystal Ball, is that not enough for FSU? Or any team that's not in the Final Four?
Yeah, I go back to what I was talking about with our team. We got to a bowl game, and, you had 2 versus 6, and you had 1 versus 8, and you had 7 versus 9, and you had kind of teams all over the place, and everybody is going into that bowl game thinking, okay, if these different scenarios happen, we've got a shot to end up number 1. And for all the negatives you can think about for that system, it did make the bowl games very important. It made your entire regular season very important. And I think once they put into place a winner-take-all one game, it really lessened the importance of those bowl games. So to me, it kind of feels like you either need to have the bowl games or you need to have a playoff. I don't think both of those work in conjunction with one another. So you've got a team that goes 13-0, and they're playing and thinking they've got a good opportunity to get in the playoffs. Once that doesn't happen, you get this consolation prize of playing in a bowl game that really is an exhibition game. And a lot of those guys say, okay, I'm done. I'm going to protect my ability to make a living in this sport and start getting ready for what I have to do to best showcase my skills, which is the Senior Bowl or workouts for pro scouts or all of those things. And I think they just decide that exhibition game at the end really isn't that big of a deal. And you're going to see a lot of players for Florida State. Some have already opted out. You're going to have a lot of guys for Georgia, I think, that will opt out. And as far as what that means for the bowl game, and I've heard a lot of people say, well, if you're Florida State and you think you belong, you can go prove it against Georgia, but you're not having a full Florida State team play against a full Georgia team. And it just feels like to me that it's been set up for, if Georgia wins that one, everybody just kind of says, see, Florida State didn't belong anyway. And if Florida State wins it, it will be, well, Georgia didn't have their full team anyway, or they were devastated by being left out of the playoff. So they didn't really care. They didn't take it seriously.
Well, I won't keep you much longer, Lulu, but and we got Joe Madden coming in next from Sports Grid. But I will say this. I kind of look at this as a bit of a referee because I hear your side, but I also see the other side. And I will say this. Is this just the exclamation point on how screwed up college football is? From this designation of the 14 playoff versus here last year at the Boca Bowl. I live in Boca Raton. Liberty comes down here to play Toledo. Their coaches are gone because they fled to Auburn. So the players were opting out, like you say. Like, how is this going to be fixed, or can it be fixed?
I think, and what has happened is every time they have gone in and said, okay, so we had the bowl system that I talked about back when I played. And the complaint then was, well, why can't we get number 1 versus number 2? We set up a system that got number 1 versus number 2 as long as they weren't in the Big Ten or the Pac-12, and everybody still complained. Then we set up a system where it actually was 1 versus 2, and then there were complaints from people who didn't land in the top 2. So 3 and 4 and 5 all felt they had a claim for it. So then we ended up with a Final Four, and now you've got teams 4, 5, or 5, 6, 7, 8 they're all thinking that they should be involved. So now we're expanding to 12. We're going to get to 12, and there will still be those on the outskirts of that, I think, that will feel like that they should have been in and should have gotten a chance, and it's going to keep it. I don't know where it ends. You just keep expanding it and expanding it further until you have, there's got to be a limit to it somewhere, and I don't think there's a way to make everybody happy with it. And it just feels like it's going to be more of these backroom dealings that aren't very transparent, and nobody really knows what parameters you have to meet to get in.
So no end in sight. NCAA sleazy. Not breaking news there. So I guess we all feel bad for FSU and see him at the Orange Bowl. I don't know if you're coming down, Lulu, but I'll be here. I got your number now. There's no escaping me anymore.
Sounds good.
I appreciate Bam Bam for making the connection. And hey, go ahead.
I will actually be back here doing our basketball game because Jeff Colhane, who does both basketball and football, will be down there doing the football game. We play Lipscomb that day in basketball, so I'll be here in Tallahassee on the air.
Okay, well, you'll be watching no matter what. I'll wave to you. Lulu, thanks so much, man. Appreciate you. Happy holidays.
I got to tell you one quick hockey story that I think you'll appreciate. Yeah. My very first live hockey game, Tampa Bay Lightning inaugural season, in the barn at the Expo Hall playing the Toronto Maple Leafs with a rookie goaltender by the name of Felix Potvin. And I think Toronto won that game like 7-1. That was my first live hockey game.
The Cat, Felix the Cat. Of course the Leafs won, right, Producer Clark? That's his team. So you remembered all these years later, Lulu. It must have been memorable. Thank you, brother. Appreciate you.
All right.
Eric Luallen, the voice of FSU baseball and Seminoles football alum.